Let's talk
about our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems.
Let's talk.
Confess I live in hell, I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony, where I can talk to you, you can talk to me.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk.
Welcome to the third program of the Talk Vermont, and the second in a series of conversations on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We met with two Vermonters from synagogues here in Vermont, Ohavi Zedek Synagogue and Temple Sinai. And today we want to introduce a different perspective, a different Vermont Jewish perspective, or perspective of people who lived in Vermont on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And so I am pleased to introduce two individuals, Jimmy Mark Leas and Ze'Eva Chasan, and I'm going to have them further introduce themselves, starting with you, Jimmy.
So I've been working on this Israel-Palestine issue for quite some time. I first became aware of it, of course, back in 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula, and defeated the Egyptians and the Syrians. And the Golan Heights was also occupied. But I really got involved back in 1982 when Israel attacked Lebanon. And I was living in the Washington, D.C. area, and we organized a group called Washington Area Jews against the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And so that was an extremely active group that was so much fervor against it was just so outrageous. Israel attacked Lebanon, went all the way up to Beirut, killed enormous number of people. It was just outrageous. We did so many things. We had so many events during that period, as did the larger peace movement in the Washington, D.C. area. And then another area where I got involved was I became an attorney. Here in Vermont, I read for the bar. I was doing patent law. I was working at IBM, and I read for the bar while working in their patent law department. And I joined the National Lawyers Guild. And then in 2009, the National Lawyers Guild had a delegation to Gaza just after Operation Cast Lead, which was an intense Israeli assault on Gaza that started at the very end of 2008, just after Christmas, and went until just before the inauguration of President Obama. And so we went in early February, just a few weeks after that war ended. There were 8 lawyers who went on that delegation, and we spent a week in Gaza, and we wrote a substantial report about war crimes that had been committed by the Israeli forces in Gaza. It was terrible destruction. It was horrible. But it was just a prelude to what's going on now. And then once again in 2012, I went to Gaza, this time on a delegation with Code Pink director Medea Benjamin, who was leading that delegation. And then since then, I've done a lot of writing for Truth Out and for other publications about the Israeli assaults on Gaza that have periodically happened since then in 2014, and then again in 2018 and 2021. there have been just one mass murder campaign after another.
No.
And this has nothing to do with what I learned in yeshiva and Hebrew school and my preparation for my bar mitzvah. What does it have to do with Judaism? So I think this is really important for Jewish. I've been thinking that it's really important for Jewish people to speak up and oppose it, just like we would if our U.S. government was doing something wrong here. We would speak up, wouldn't we? That's what we're trained to do as Americans. And so that's what I've been doing.
Thank you, Jimmy. By the way, my name is Reverend Arnold Thomas. I'm the moderator of the Talk Vermont, and this is really a crucial issue, and I'm so glad to have Jimmy involved, and also Ze'Eva Chasan. Ze'eva, could you introduce yourself and why you're interested in this particular topic?
Yeah, definitely. I'm Ze'Eva Chasan. My dad was a rabbi at Ohavi Zedek from 1990 until 2015. I haven't been involved as long because I've only been alive since like 1990. And also for like, I was just too scared to say anything, too brainwashed by Zionism for so long. So I'm making up for lost time by saying a bunch of stuff people don't want to hear in a lot of contexts, but other people do want to hear. So I'm here to talk about what's going on. And it's important to me because I agree with Jimmy. Israel, and Zionism, have as much to do with Judaism as the Klan has to do with Christianity. They're not compatible. And I have been speaking out about this since 2023 when I wrote my open letter to the Burlington, Vermont Jewish community after Kashin, Ahmed, Kenan, Abdul Hamid, and Hisham Awartani were shot on the street I grew up playing on when I was a little girl. And I've been involved in fighting for the city council resolution in Burlington, Vermont that didn't pass, and also stuff here in Massachusetts as well, doing organizing with my neighbors and friends.
Well, we're glad to have you involved, and considering your upbringing in Vermont and your connections with Ohavi Zedek Synagogue, your perspective also provides an interesting one from having been raised in a congregation that I guess represents various points of views, and I guess as a result of having various points of views, it's difficult for one person to speak in behalf of a particular group of people. So I'm glad that you're both here to share your points of view. The viewers should also know that this second session devoted to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was supposed to involve Vermont Palestinians. And I had actually consulted with a Vermont Palestinian whose name is Moshe Ishak, and he highly recommended you both to be involved in this discussion. He unfortunately could not be here, but I'm hoping that in the future we will have sessions by which Vermont Palestinians can also share their perspectives. Let me provide a brief historical context to this conflict, as I did in the first session. Palestine is situated really as a link between three continents: Africa, Asia, and Europe. And the region Palestine has a tumultuous historical, cultural, and political conflict that has gone back for ages. Many Jews claim ancestral ties to the region dating back to the settlement of Hebrew tribes fleeing Egypt among the Canaanites, and a population that Palestinians also trace a portion of their ancestry. In time, a federated monarchy emerged, a century-long united realm under Israel's Saul King Saul, King David, and his son Solomon, and then two separate monarchies of Israel to the north and Judah to the south. Despite conquests and numerous empires, Jews would inhabit the region until their expulsion by Roman Emperor Hadrian in 135 CE, after a failed Jewish revolt against Rome. With the rise and expansion of Islam in the 7th century CE and the spread of the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century to the end of World War I in the 20th century, Arab Muslims became the majority population in Palestine. In the late 19th century, Theodor Herzl, convinced that anti-Semitism would prevent Jews from feeling at home in any part of the world, resolved that the only solution was to establish a Jewish state. In 1970, before the end of World War I, and after the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the British, which gained control of Palestine, issued a Balfour Declaration, favoring the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. The League of Nations gave Britain mandatory power over Palestine in 1922, and Arab efforts to prevent Jewish migration led to growing tension and violence between Arabs and Jews, causing the British to announce their plan to end control of the region in 1947. The United Nations General Assembly then recommended partitioning Palestine into two states, one Arab and the other Jewish. And while Jews accepted the partition plan declaring Israel's independence on May 14, 1948, Arabs both in Palestine and surrounding nations rejected it. Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Syria invaded Israel from all sides. Israel won that war and as a result conquered more territory than mandated in the partition plan. During the war, 700,000, about 80% of the Palestinian population, fled or were driven out of the territory Israel conquered and were not allowed to return. After the 1948 war, only two parts of Palestine remained in Arab control: the West Bank and East Jerusalem under Jordan, and Gaza controlled by Egypt, both of which were conquered by Israel in the Six-Day War in 1967. Israel started establishing settlements in these occupied territories following the Six-Day War despite international objection, while the Palestinian National Movement gained international recognition and support because of the Palestinian Liberation Organization under Yasser Arafat. In 1993, the Oslo Peace Accord between Israel and the PLO established the Palestinian Authority as an interim body to run Gaza and the West Bank, but not East Jerusalem, pending a permanent solution. However, further peace initiatives proved unsuccessful, and relations between Israelis and Palestinians have been marked by further conflict up to the conflict, the war in Gaza, and now the conflict, the continued conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. You should also know that in one of the problems of the peace accord was that only the PLO was acknowledged as a representative of Palestinians. Both Hamas and Hezbollah rejected the accord partly for those reasons. And so this brings us up to the present day situation. Jimmy, Ze'eva, if you wish to amend, add to, correct, feel free to do so, but I just wanted to provide as much of an historical context for the viewers as possible.
Thank you, Pastor. I do have one correction, or it's
Yes,
just
go ahead.
calling it a conflict or the way it's usually framed is kind of a misnomer because it implies there's two equally powerful sides opposing each other, and it's really not. It hasn't been that ever. Like when you mentioned the amount of the Palestinian population expelled in the Nakba, it's there is nothing comparable from the Israeli side. It's very, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Now, I should also, to be fair, in our last conversation that involved representatives from Ohavi Zedek and Temple Sinai, one of the panelists mentioned that between 1948 and I guess the present day, roughly about 1 million Jews have been expelled from the Arab countries, so this, if you want to comment upon that, feel free to do so. But I just wanted to let you know that that was one of the comments made as a result of the introduction I made regarding the historical context.
Yeah, I think that I think Ze'eva's point is well taken. The fact that, as you said, 80% or 750 to 900,000 Palestinians were expelled from Palestine in the 1947, starting in late 1947, and continuing for a few years. There was 500 villages destroyed, which demonstrates as the Jewish Israeli forces conquered villages and expanded the territory from that had been allocated by the United Nations. And they started doing that in 1947 before any Arab armies intervened. They only intervened instead 6 months later. The UN resolution dividing the countries initiated the conflict. That was at the end of November 1947. And it wasn't until May 15th that Israel declared the state of the Jewish forces, let's say the Haganah, declared Israel as an independent state. So during that period, there was a tremendous military campaign against the Palestinians. It was I think Ze'eva's right. It wouldn't be correct to define it as a Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was an Israeli organized assault on the indigenous population. We saw something like that happen here in America, where the indigenous population was destroyed, was annihilated. Similar things happened in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand. So this is typical of what happens in a colonial settler state. There was an indigenous Jewish population that had remained and was living in peace with the Christian and Arab populations in Palestine for hundreds of years. But then there was this influx, as you pointed out, of immigrants starting in the early 20th century, towards the end, started and gradually more and more Jewish immigrants. It was the end of the colonial era, just as colonialism was peaking and in decline. We saw a massive decline in colonial control over Africa and Asia, Vietnam, all over the world. Colonialism was in decline. Somehow, Israel became basically a colonizing enterprise at the very end of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
people would say at the behest of the United Nations.
I don't know if it was, I don't know that would be accurate to
Okay.
say that the UN was seeking to settle what was a hot situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came up with this idea of partition.
Mm-hmm.
That was what also happened in India.
Yep.
Tremendous violence associated with both of these things. Partition didn't happen in South Africa. We got we had apartheid, which also started around that same time, 1948. But it's so interesting. We had it eventually, with a lot of conflict, apartheid was overthrown.
Yeah.
And so this is the kind of thing that can happen with this Jewish supremacist state, very similar to the apartheid system with a lot of differences. It's an apartheid under Jewish domination instead of Boer domination in South Africa, or in this country we had something similar in the southern states.
Sure.
We had an array of southern states with white supremacy, with Jim Crow, we called it. We had our own language for it. Maybe it's a mistake to call what's going on in Palestine or Israel as apartheid. That's a South African import. That's a word that was used for South Africa.
Well, we'll indulge that conversation also, but I think what you've been responding to and what Ze'eva has been responding to is a question that I really want to specifically put out there.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts regarding the existence of Israel as a Jewish state?
Just before we get into that, I have one more thing, if that's okay. Just
I'm going to start with you, Ze'eva.
okay, yeah, and I just wanted to mention that the Arab-Jewish distinction kind of erases the existence of the Mizrahim, like the people Jimmy mentioned who stayed there and are Arab and Jewish. So It's important to mention that. But onto the question, I don't feel like Israel is representing Judaism in any real way. It's about as relevant to Judaism as the Klan is to Christianity. And it's
That's a good point.
Thank you. It's definitely not helping keep Jews safe in any way, because it's associating our legacy, our name, like our traditions with a settler colonial expansionist regime. And I hadn't known about this Talmud thing until recently, but I saw this like Instagram reel or whatever the heck the kids watch these days from one of the Neturei Karta people. And he was saying that according to the Talmud, we aren't even supposed to get a homeland until after the Messiah shows face. So if you're trying to set up a Jewish state and do it and say you're doing it by the book, you're really not. Yeah. That's what I got.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ze'eva. Jimmy, why don't you expound upon
this
that?
idea of Jewish state contradicts something fundamental in Judaism, that you have to be a person to be Jewish. You can't be a state and be Jewish. You can't be an animal. You can't be a machine. You have to be a human being to be a Jewish person under Jewish tradition and Jewish law. So what is a Jewish state? It's a new idea that doesn't really correspond to the religion. It's something that is a modern construct. Even the state is something that goes back several hundred years, but it isn't something that's somehow in any way connected with the Jewish religion. And So what is it really? What does it really come down to? That the Jewish people, the ones who call themselves ethnically Jewish, are going to be in control, are going to dominate, are going to be supreme, are going to be the masters. Why is that? We in America don't have any kind of a system like that, at least since the
Theoretically, anyway.
Yeah, at least theoretically, not de jure. We may have a de facto in a lot of situations, and we fight that. We get, especially here in Vermont, people are very sensitive to any kind of oppression like that. So how can we be supporting it with funding and bombs and all this destruction? In Israel, why do we support supremacy like that? Why can't we say, look, equality works? If people are equal, they don't have as much conflict. If they have equal rights under the law. This is a system we've had for 250 years, and we've been gradually improving it. It didn't start out very equal, but it's something to work for. Instead, they've set up what we had in the southern states, where we had, by law, segregation, inequality, vast inequality. It's a Jim Crow system on steroids in Israel.
Now, I'm glad you're acknowledging. I know that before the establishment of Israel as a state, as a Jewish state, Jews were divided as to whether there should actually be a state of Israel. I think such prominent individuals such as Albert Einstein was opposed to the establishment of a Jewish state for those very reasons that you mentioned. But other Jews might say this, Judah, ancient Judah was a nation that was also controlled by a Jewish Sanhedrin, religious leaders who were both political as well as religious in cooperating with Rome. So why not? Why not a Jewish state? And my second question is, given that history, why not the reestablishment of a Jewish state? And secondly, and I think you both have touched upon this, can Israel be both Jewish and a democracy? Again, Ze'eva, let's have you chime in on that, and then we'll have Jimmy.
Sorry, chime in on what exactly? I think there are multiple things there that I.
You want me to repeat the question, or?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay. The question is, in that Judah, ancient Judah, was both a Jewish region as well as a religious state under Rome. Why can't there be a reemergence of a Jewish state of Israel, which has both religious and cultural identity, but also exists as a I guess a secular entity as well? And so that leads into the second question: Can Israel exist as both a Jewish state and a democracy?
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's kind of not relevant that there was one so far in the past, because that's just not the reality we live in anymore. Like, the way things were can't be the way things are again. You just can't put things back. And like, sorry, can we just come back to me on this, please?
Sure.
So on that, it may be that the Palestinians are descended from those Jews, that some of them remain Hebrew, some of them became Christian, and some of them later became Muslim. 700 years later, when Muhammad and Islam started, that's when some converted either from Christian or from Jewish to Muslim. There's a lot of that's why we call them the cousins.
Yeah.
We're related genealogically.
Yeah.
And Jewish people have the right to change their religion, and other people have the right to become Jewish. And what happened is that the people in part of Europe became Jewish and now are colonizing or have colonized Palestine. So is it this? Can it be the same as what the original Judah was? I think it was way before the Christian era started.
Yes,
wasn't
it was. Yeah.
I think this is difficult because maybe there was more homogeneity. Maybe there weren't Christians and Muslims in those days. So if you wanted to believe in one God, that was what that was the religion. That was the available group to be a part of. Now that's been divided into these three, and each of them has its own divisions. Muslim has many major parts. Judaism has lots of different segments, and so does Christianity. And you even find like in Ireland, you had tremendous conflict between Christians, Catholics versus Protestants, and so on. So these things, it's very difficult, as Ze'Eva said, to put it together again now. But we're seeing in places like Vermont and New York and other parts of New England, where if you have a system where everyone is equal and the government doesn't establish religion or discriminate based on religion, you can have everything working fine. We don't have to have conflict about who's in the state telling us who's on top because of their religion or their ethnicity. If we only just look at our own system, we can see how a better system can emerge in Israel based on equal rights. Have a system. So the idea of the Jewish state and the idea of Zionism, my family, my parents, my grandparents were very strong Zionists. My grandfather met with the first president of Israel, Ben-Gurion, before the state was established, when he came to Boston to speak, and they lived in Dorchester. So they were it was very strong because there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear for the safety of the Jewish people, and that fear came out of the Holocaust. I mean, this is the problem is Israel is now conducting another Holocaust. It's a complete destruction of the Gaza Strip. Hundreds of thousands of homes destroyed. Farmland destroyed. Farm animals killed. 20,000 children killed. They're bombing people in tents. Their homes destroyed. It's a nightmare. And they're not allowing food in for almost 60 days. Food has not been allowed in. Now the farms have been destroyed. The farmers can't even get to where their farms were because Israel has encroached on a wide gap of land between the border of Gaza and where people's homes are. They've bulldozed all these homes along the border, which is good farmland, can't use it. So now they're dependent on food aid. They've been reduced to such poverty that food has to be brought in by truck. And they've cut off electricity, so they can't desalinate the water. They've bombed the wells. They've destroyed the sewage system. It's a nightmare that's been created. This is classic genocide.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I'm trying to, it's hard for me to play both sides of the fence here. But
you're doing a good job.
The common Jewish response, let's say among conservative Jews, is that we're dealing with a Palestinian faction that, first of all, does not acknowledge the right of Israel to exist. Both Hamas and Hezbollah have not acknowledged the right of Israel to exist. I think PLO under Yasser Arafat did make that acknowledgement. But what I also hear you saying, both you, Jimmy, and you, Ze'eva, is that as a state, you have difficulty with the concept of Israel existing as a state, and if things were as they should be, as you sort of an ideal setting, with Jews, Palestinians, Arabs, Christians, Muslims living in the same region, Israel will cease to exist as a Jewish state. You're okay with that? That's what I hear you saying?
Okay, so first of all, this idea of the right of a state to exist, that's totally contradicted by the Declaration of Independence here. Mm-hmm. We never said a state has a right to exist. Mm-hmm. We were brought up with how wonderful America is. And the idea was that when a government, it says right in it,
That's
when
right.
a government ceases to protect the rights of the people,
it is the right of the people to overcome.
alter or not overthrow, or abolish.
Yeah.
I think it was alter or abolish that state.
Yeah.
The state doesn't have a right to exist. What has a right to exist are the people. And the people are the sovereign. So here we have a state that needs to be altered or abolished, because look what it's doing. It's committing the most heinous crimes against the people under its rule. They don't have the right to vote. They don't have the right even to move between one place and another without roadblocks and all kinds of. They have segregated roads. So the Jewish Israelis go on these fast roads between any place they want to go on the West Bank and in Israel. But within the West Bank, there are checkpoints for the Palestinians. They're not allowed on it's.
And from your experience, how about Israeli Palestinians? What is their situation like from your experience?
Second-class citizens. So they're allowed. They have legal equality, mm-hmm. but they don't serve in the army, so that disallows them from getting certain privileges. So instead of it being, you don't have the right to do something, well, it's become a privilege that you get from having been served in the army. Mm-hmm. So they're very on edge. They know they're next to be oppressed because they look across and see how hundreds of thousands were thrown out, and now the occupied territories are severely oppressed. So their turn could be coming next. It's really a chilling. When you attack one person's rights, everyone else feels they could be next. And I think that there's it's not as they're not under the same level of oppression as the occupied territories. It isn't. It might not be considered. I think it's more controversial, let's say it that way, that it's apartheid within the original 1967 borders that were established by Israel. Because there is much more freedom for Palestinians who are still living within the original 67 borders of Israel. But that is not the case in the West Bank and in Gaza. So it's much more severe for people there. There's two sets of laws. There's a civilian law for the Palestinians and the Jews within the 67 borders of Israel. There's military law for the Palestinians in the West Bank. And then there's just massive bombing and destruction in Gaza.
Thank you. Ze'eva, what any perspective that you would like to add to what has already been said?
Yeah, but real fast, dynamic really needs to change because there needs to be more interaction with me because I'm really just not getting a chance to say much before the subject changes.
Yeah.
If we could work on that, that'd be great because it just doesn't really feel like I'm participating that much.
Yeah, so what would you like to say regarding the situation both among Palestinians within Israel as well as those involved in the West Bank as well as Gaza? What is the difference from your perspective as to their treatment?
I just want to answer the question about what was it? Democracy and state and Judah that I didn't have a chance to before because I couldn't think of it. And just, I think as far as democracy goes, it really depends on how you define democracy. If you define it the way it is in America, and if the question is, can Israel to be a democracy and still favor a Jewish majority, then I would say yeah, because America is the model for that. America inspired Nazi Germany, and then Israel's taking pages from both books and doing all sorts of bad stuff now, which is really not compatible with democracy in the real sense of a word. It's compatible if you define it, like I said, the settler colonial way, where you just have the system built on implicit or explicit hierarchy based on who's in what group. And the argument about why not Jewish state again like it was, like I said earlier, is no, okay. That's what I wanted to say about that.
I'm glad you did. I'm so glad you did. So what I hear you saying, Ze'eva, is that democracy is basically defined by those in power, and it doesn't really. There's no true democracy when everyone is not equally participant in that power structure, in the power, and that's I sense that's what you say is existing presently in Israel. Let's look at the surrounding nations, and I'm just relying on whatever experience you bring to this particular topic. You have surrounding nations: Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, that are predominantly Muslim nations, and I would say, in many cases, Islam is the state religion, is the established religion. what's the difference between Israel as a Jewish state as opposed to the surrounding nations as and where Islam is the predominant religion?
I think a big difference is also just goes back to why not Jewish state like in the past. It's because that Jewish state, just like the Arab states that are predominantly Muslim around Israel, weren't imported from Europe. So it's like we have one state with lots of immigrants coming from Europe and trying to establish and like a system that favors that group versus people who've just historically lived there, and that's the system that has come to be through a process that isn't literally settler colonialism.
So there is a hierarchy, a sense of prejudice, discrimination between, let's say, European Jews and Jews that are more indigenous to the area.
Right. So if I can say something. So I think you mentioned earlier in the program that Jews were expelled from other states in the area, and Ze'Eva pointed out that they were Arabic. They spoke Arabic. They were integrated with the countries where they lived. They were in many cases a minority in those countries. In all those cases, they were a minority, but they were Arabic, mm-hmm. like the other, and they participated in the societies without being oppressed like they were in Europe. Mm-hmm. So the Jews in the Arab countries, in fact, one of the things that I was struck by when I was young and in Hebrew school, and we learned about the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, and that this was the start of the Inquisition, and many Jews who stayed in Spain were forced to convert, but it was under the Moors or the Arab rule in Spain that the golden age of the Jewish people.
Maimonides and
right.
others, yes. Mm-hmm.
So under Arab rule, Jews were not oppressed like they were in Europe. Mm-hmm. There was never a Holocaust for the Arab-speaking Jews in all of these different countries. What happened when Israel was founded was a desire to populate Israel with more Jews, mm-hmm. to increase the population. So there was a lot of effort to stir things up in those countries, and it eventually led to them being driven out or voluntarily moving. But now, as you point out, those countries don't have, except for Iran, has reasonable Jewish population. I think it's like 25 or 30,000 Jewish people still living in Iran. But in most of the other countries like Jordan and Egypt, and very few Jews remain. Some, but not too many. So it isn't really a possibility of conflict. Whereas in Palestine, under Israeli rule, half the people are Palestinian, or a little more than half are Palestinian now. Their birth rate has been fairly high, and the influx of Jews from other parts of the world has not been as strong. So we have this conflict that is equal populations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically you're saying, and I think you're also agreeing, Ze'Eva, is that if true democracy existed in Israel, there would no longer be a Jewish state, because the Palestinian population is increasing in number, there would be such a need for integrating values, perspectives, and so on, that Israel as a Jewish state would cease to exist.
And it can happen. We see it in South Africa, where the apartheid system is abolished. We have equal rights. There's still tremendous problems, but they can make progress.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Ze'Eva, I'd like to get your thoughts on this because we're coming to a close. But if you're saying Israel should not exist as a Jewish state, where do Jews find refuge from continued oppression, from a history of oppression? Can that refuge be among places, nations in which you're already trying to etch out some sort of existence within the populations that you find yourself? If not Israel, where can Jews find refuge?
Palestine. Just talking about if Israel stops being a Jewish state, we just should stop having state religions. They're historically horrendous, like state Shinto, Nazi Germany. They have a terrible track record of committing war crimes and atrocities, so we should really just put that in the dustbin of history. We can find safety living among people as neighbors instead of trying to conquer them. Before, Jimmy was saying, when Spain was under Arab control, that was when there was relative harmony among different religions, because there wasn't just the same kind of thing we see happening now with Israel. And the idea that a Jewish state somehow protects us in any way is just completely asinine, because the state is committing a genocide, a Holocaust, and it's associating that with Judaism and Jews, which intrinsically paints us as genocidaires, if that's the premise that every people are accepting that Israel is a Jewish state. It just means Jews are people who are, okay with doing these terrible things, which makes it really unsafe to call yourself a Jew, as it turns out, because then people think you're a monster.
And I think that's the dilemma that we face with any nation that identifies either as a ethnic or religious majority. How can true democracy exist? Now, I think organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League will say that Israel as a Jewish state, Israel can exist as a Jewish state and be a democracy. But in its attempt to try and maintain a Jewish majority over other factions, that's where the dilemma comes. Can true democracy truly exist? And we find that that also is happening in many other countries, including the United States, where there's an attempt to maintain a white Anglo-Saxon majority and diminish or prevent populations of color from having any sort of ascendancy or voice. That upsurge has certainly existed, but it's not just existing in this country, it's existing in various parts of the world as well. So I think that's a dilemma that we continue to deal with. How can true democracy exist when there is an attempt to preserve and maintain and strengthen a particular population, a particular culture over and against others? Yeah. Let's give you both some we have I think about 5 minutes. Let's give you both a final say on this matter, however you wish to resolve this. And again, because Ze'Eva, You're coming to us from a distance. Let's give you the first word, and we'll close with Jimmy.
But I actually have a second word, so I have a little more time to think, please.
Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't think Israel can solve the problem that you, or any country can solve the problem that you raise. When you have, when you want to be a racist state, when you want to have one group dominating over the others, you can't be a democracy, except among that top group. So among the Jews in Israel, they have elections, and the small minority of Palestinians who are allowed to vote, who are members of the state. So that's how they solve it. They say, okay, we'll have democracy among ourselves, and we'll exclude the vast majority of the Palestinians from participating. That's what apartheid South Africa did. That's what they did in the South with Jim Crow laws and laws preventing people from registering to vote. That's why we had these Freedom Summer.
Yeah.
That's why we have the Voting Rights Act. So we wanted to overcome that and not do it with violence. Change the rules, change the laws so that we can have everyone on an equal footing. And now we keep trying to find more ways of getting people to be allowed to vote. In Vermont, you can register on the list, you can register to, there are all these things to get people more involved, no matter what class or race you're involved in. And it still isn't enough.
Yeah.
But in Israel, it's like so horrendous. You've got physical, it's not just the state doing it. They've empowered the settlers. They've taken the occupied territories totally against the law and brought in their population into territory that's occupied and given them weapons, and it's like a horrible situation of oppression in the occupied territories.
Ze'eva.
I do think the dilemma can't be solved while the system of domination as such exists. Like in America and Canada, all settler colonies are diametrically opposed to solving the problem. That's their entire point. The only way to resolve this contradiction is with decolonization. Haiti didn't gain independence from France by voting. Ireland didn't win back as much of its territory as it currently has by getting more Catholics into power. They definitely tried that, and it took armed conflict to get back to what they have. Even British still control North Ireland. So I don't think the way forward includes the way forward that ends with Jews and everybody living safely and like harmoniously involves any kind of system like built on that kind of foundation of oppression inherent to settler colonialism. Even if it calls itself a democracy, like all of them do, it's just words that don't actually match reality. Like Patrick Pearse, one of the Irish revolutionaries, said the substance of truth doesn't change, but the substance of freedom doesn't change. It's like you can say a thing and it doesn't make it that thing.
Well, Ze'eva, Jimmy, thank you both for sharing your thoughts and perspectives and experience on this particular topic. It's an ongoing discussion, and we're going to continue opportunities to share points of views from Vermont Palestinians as well as Vermont Jews on this topic. But for now, thank you so much. Should let the viewers know that our next topic of discussion will address the Declaration of Inclusion in which Al Wakefield, a Vermonter, a black Vermonter, has been promoting within towns and cities within the state. And so we'll have an opportunity to talk with him and his colleagues on this particular declaration, what progress has made. And we will also, in the near future, meet with Reverend Mark Hughes, who is the director and founder of Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, to see what actions, what efforts, what priorities that organization is pursuing in trying to make Vermont a more equitable, hospitable state for all.
Thank you for having me on the show.
It is a pleasure to have you both, and I look forward to meeting you again, and especially you, Ze'Eva, in person sometime soon. So take care, and thank you all for logging in to this particular session of the Talk Vermont. Take care, and good night.
Good night.
Let's talk.
About our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems.
Let's talk.
Confess I live in hell. I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a new, a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony, where I can talk to you, you can talk to me.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk.